Alright, so I'm going to go over a couple of render settings. And then we're going to render it. Or at least you're going to render it. I already rendered it. So we run some AOVs. If you have my... so if you're on Redshift 3, you should have this Redshift AOVs thing. If you're not, you need to do on the AOV tab on output. You can put your AOVs there. But if you have my presets folder, then you should have this drop-down menu with AOV, and then all of the AOVs should be there. So the AOVs that you want to make are diffuse lighting, reflections, refractions, global illumination, specular lighting, Z-depth. You don't really need normals and world position in this case, unless you want to use those for your composite. But you can. I just have them included by default. Subsurface gathering and crypto math is always useful, of course. So those are the ones that you want to use in this case. So let's just configure our ROP. So I didn't do a lot with different samples in here, if I'm honest. Like normally what you would do in Redshift is you would really go, so that we can do that, but how you normally go about changing Redshift renders is you go into something and you fire up a render. Like, let's say I am going to, so let's press render. I'll take a little bit. That's always a thing. Like if once you like now it's not so bad, but if you have super heavy scenes, stuff can take so long for an IPR to start up. It's so annoying. It needs to load all of this stuff into memory. Probably for this shot we could exclude a lot of the things. But all right, so it's gonna render. All right, so what you could do is like, you could go here now through your AOVs because we have all of our AOVs. So that means we can look at each AOV individually here. So we can look at diffuse, reflection, refraction, GI. So GI is quite noisy, as you can see. Specular, well, and your other stuff. So how you generally work in Redshift is like you have a couple of sampling options. On settings here, you have your unified samples, which is kind of an override for your entire thing. So if you have a lot of depth of field, or if you have like a lot of motion blur, you generally increase this. But if you just want, like if you want to optimize your renders, like for example in here, you can see our GI is very noisy, but our other passes look quite okay. So what we could do is we can go into settings, sampling overrides, and here you can change the individual samples for all of your stuff. So if let's say our reflection was noisy, which is not, we could increase our samples on just our reflection. So we could make it 512, for example. In this case, it's our GI. So I guess let's increase our brute force GI raise to like something like 256. Let's look at our GI. Already looks a lot better. Let's put it to 1024. So you see, it makes a little bit of a difference. Not so much. I'm going to put it down because it also makes it slower. Probably going to increase the unified samples a little bit. 8 and 32, that will probably also make a difference. Again, this is sort of an override. So if you crank your other samples very high and then this is going to just make it a lot slower. So this seems to have mostly cleared up some of the issues that we had. So that's kind of how you configure your AOVs. Like all of the other stuff should be here. So we have subsurface scattering, looks fine. So with the subsurface scattering, we use point-based subsurface scattering, which can get a little bit like, because it's an estimate, sort of like it's scattering these points, right? Every frame is blending them out. So you can get like flicker in that if you don't like if you use that. So if you want to get rid of that, you probably want to go into your SSS tab and increase your sample rate. The GI race, I think, is mostly for the brute force. I'm not completely sure on that. So interpolation quality high, so you can crank that stuff up. It's going to be a little bit slower, but that again is going to make sure that you don't have that much, well, that you don't really have any of the jittering stuff going on. Right, so now the main thing left to do is just set up our ROPs to render all of our to render all of our shots. Configure some AOVs, and then you can just render it, composite it, and then we're basically done. So if you have my presets, you should have that preset we selected earlier, and then you should have all of that stuff up here. If you don't, then you can just put your own output name down here in the in the output prefix. Like as I said, like I use these presets where I just that's included in the download, so you can just download this anyway. But I use this to just quickly, easily set names, and those will end up in the root folder of our project folder. Let's just call this shot1. So shot_1. And our frame range should be, I guess, roughly like 80 frames. So let's put it around 80 frames. And what we also want to set up some AOVs. So if you're on Redshift 3, then you have this one, Redshift AOVs. If you're still on Redshift 2, you can make your AOVs over here in the AOV tab, and then you can just, let me remove this. Then you can just make AOVs here by clicking the plus icon, and you can select all of your AOVs there. Okay, so now the main thing left is actually to just configure our shots to render properly. So let's just, on our preset here, if you don't have this preset, but it's included in the, well, in the downloads for this, you can just download it if you want. But if you don't, just make sure to give a proper name and stuff and folder down here, common file prefix. I'm just gonna do it here, and this will make my renders end up in the correct folder, which is my regrowth tutorial /render 3D, and then whatever I put here. So the shot is main, and then whatever I put here. So I'm just gonna call it shot1. So let's call this shot1. Shot_1. And we also want to use the camera shot1, so that's already correct here. So, and frame range should be, if we're looking through the cam here, should be around 80 frames. Let's do 80 frames. Let's just make shot2. So shot2 will be the wide one. So let's just render, like again, you probably want to do flipbooks for this first to see what your range is going to be. Just make an edit with your flipbooks to kind of see how well it works. I also did that. Like if you did your flipbook, then you should be able to kind of figure out a little bit better if your render is actually going to work. So here's actually an example of that. So here's my, here's what I did. It's not the final version, by the way. I did end up changing the plant a little bit after this, but you can kind of see, oh, you already get a good idea of how this looks. So, and then once you start rendering it, at least you know like the frame ranges that you do. So just base your frame ranges based on that. So let's do shot 3. Oh, and by the way, on here, we also need to say, do we want to use shot 2 cam? Oh, and we don't want to have that thing going on. Same for this. So let's say frame 30 until something like 200. And shot 3. Probably like, let's do 120-ish. 120 until let's say just 160 or something. And in this one, we also don't need all of our objects. So we can exclude some objects. We don't want to render our jar, for example. We only want to render our plant. Let's just only render our plant here. Oh, and by the way, there's one more thing that I almost forgot, which I'm going to include. Also the little dirt ground patch. We also still need to include that one. So let's just do this after this is configured. So this is looking good. So let's do the ground patch first, which is, so we have the ground, we have the dirt here. Let's see, where's the, we had the dirt patch somewhere. Where do we have it? Oh, there's that one. Just enable tessellation, enable displacement. Let's put our material on it. So just grab our compost material. Let's just see how this renders just this one. So let's just go in our shot 2. Let's just copy our stuff and then just put our dirt patch. Let's just only render that one. So we know that that's working. Okay, that seems to work quite well. Let's double check if all of our cameras are full HD, which they aren't. That's kind of what I thought when I looked at the low resolution of my IPR here. Right, so dirt patch also works. So now what we want to do is we have everything set up. All of our stuff is configured. We have our AUVs here, so it's all working fine. So what you can, if you have deadline configured, what you can just do is just put a deadline rob and then put all of these in, submit it to deadline. If you don't have deadline configured, if you don't have it, by the way, deadline is free for up to 2 machines. So if you don't have it, you can just install it. I have a video on that. If you just look at how to configure deadline and then my name, you will find it. But what you can also do is just hook all of your ROPs up to a merge. And on your ROPs, what you need to do is you need to disable non-block current frame, else it's gonna not work once you merge everything in. You can also, by the way, daisy chain them. Maybe that's just a little bit easier to look at. So let's we can also just do it like that, do it like that. I'm just going to put them to single frame for now, just to test everything out. So I'm just going to press render. So I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to frame by frame. It's looking good. So I'm going to just press render, then everything should end up in the correct folder, and then I'll have some nice renders. Okay, so there's one additional thing that I haven't recorded yet, but you also, if you want to get motion blur, what you need to do is on your ROPs, you need to go to Redshift, motion blur, and you can enable motion blur and make sure to enable it for everything. So motion blur, mesh deformation blur, and instance blur. And for most stuff, Redshift will just handle it by itself properly, even if you don't get point velocity on it by default. So for example, we don't have point velocity on our plant, but Redshift will calculate it itself at render time. But on some other stuff, like the dirt here, we have proper velocity, right, on this thing. So what we want to do in that case is we want to go to the Redshift tab here, to settings, and then enable mesh deformation blur from velocity attribute. So that will make sure that it will use the velocity attribute. And we can do the same on the RNDR grains, which should also have that. Right, so just as an extra thing, because of course it's gonna look nice if we have actual motion blur on our plant when it's growing, right? Right, so everything rendered. I have the 3 folders here. So shot 1, let me just open this stuff. Generally takes a little bit of time to open with DJV, but Let me just open it. The gamma looks a little bit weird here. This was because we were working in ASUS, but you see it rendered fine. So the other one. Shot 2. So it also looks pretty good. I mean, you can still tweak this, of course. Like my original, I played some more with it, and I mean, I like the look of my original a little bit better. But it's as you can see, it's like fairly similar to what I made originally. Oh yeah, in the last one, I did change the branches to be a little bit thicker because the leaves were not properly on it. But you can see, looks pretty fine. So yeah, from here you can take it into compositing. I did a little bit of compositing, not too much, but if you look at my thing, yeah, if you just look at, like, I added like some light shafts, I added some particles in the back, but it was all just After Effects, so there wasn't really any yeah, that wasn't any 3D or anything. I'm not gonna do anything on the compositing side because it wasn't that interesting. So yeah, that concludes the entire thing actually. So I really hope you learned a lot. I thought this was kind of a fun one to make. Hope you like this sort of new format of me also presenting a little bit in the camera sometimes. Was also interesting trying to record it like this. A little bit trickier to manage, but was pretty fun to try. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching for getting the exclusive extended version. So thanks for that, you're helping out. And yeah, well, until next time, thanks, peace.